Hey, howdy, hello. This is Tanya the Tour Guide bringing you another episode of New Orleans Secret Myths. This week we'll be covering something that most people don't talk about enough. A place that has been eradicated from history, and we're going to cover it today. There is a field in Chalmette, Louisiana that lies only a few miles downriver from the French Quarter. Visitors come here looking for a battle. They come searching for Andrew Jackson, red-coated British soldiers, Choctaw fighters, Kentucky riflemen, for free men of color, for Jean Lafitte's Baratarians. They stand beneath the towering Chalmette Monument and imagine the morning of January 8th, 1815. The cannon smoke, the thunder of artillery, the earth shaking beneath thousands of marching feet. They are told about an American victory, a nation defended, a city saved, but beneath that famous story lies another. A story that did not begin with a cannon and did not end with a surrender. Close your eyes. Let the monument disappear. Let the battlefield signs fade. Let the manicured landscape dissolve. Go back 65 years. There is a road cutting through this grass. It begins near the St. Bernard Highway and runs toward the Mississippi River. On one side of it stands modest wooden houses. Each has a porch, a yard, a vegetable garden. Some have chickens scratching behind fences. Children run barefoot along the road. A mother calls from a doorway. Two men repair a roof. A woman gathers pecans beneath the trees. Farther away, someone swings a bat across a baseball field. A grocery store serves the neighborhood. Music drifts from a schoolhouse that becomes a dance hall after dark. And above the road rises a church called Battleground Baptist Church. More than 200 African Americans lived here. Their parents lived here. Their grandparents lived here. Some families have been connected to this narrow strip of land since the years immediately following slavery. The residents do not call it a battlefield. They call it the village. Its official name is Fazendeville. In the early 1960s, the United States government will decide that this community must disappear. Not because of a hurricane, not because of fire, not because the village failed, but because America wants the land to look more like it did in 1815. This is the story of Jean-Pierre Fazende, a free man of color connected to a piece of land where black families created homes, businesses, faith, independence, and generational memory. It is the story of Fazendeville, what it gave its people, what America took from them, and how a village erased from the landscape refused to disappear from the history. I'm Tanya the Tour Guide, and this is New Orleans Secret Myths, bringing you in. Before there was a battlefield, before there was a plantation, before there was a road called Fazendeville, there was water. The Mississippi River curved through an immense living landscape of marsh, forest, prairie, bayou, and swamp. The land did not remain still. The river flooded, sediment accumulated, channels changed, storms rearranged the coast. Indigenous peoples understood the rhythms of this world long before Europeans attempted to control it. They hunted deer and smaller game. They gathered plants, fished. They moved through rivers and bayous that connected communities across southern Louisiana. The waterways were no barriers. There were roads. The Chalmette landscape is commonly remembered as the site of the Battle of New Orleans, but the National Park Service now interprets it as a place containing many historical layers, including indigenous occupation, colonial agriculture, slavery, War, Fazendeville, and modern commemoration. Then came the French. New Orleans was established in 1718. Colonial authorities sought to transform the lower Mississippi Valley into an agricultural and commercial empire. But first, the land had to be made useful to Europeans. Forests were cleared, wetlands were drained, canals were dug, levees built, and fields were planted. And much of that brutal work was performed by enslaved Africans. They cut through cypress and undergrowth. They moved mud beneath the Louisiana sun. They raised earthen barriers against the Mississippi. They dug drainage ditches through saturated ground. They transformed land colonial owners claimed as property, while those same owners claimed human beings as property. Plantations spread along the natural levee beside the river: rice, indigo, and eventually sugar cane. Sugar demanded land, capital, machinery, and relentless labor. Cane had to be cut quickly, transported quickly, crushed quickly, boiled quickly. The fields could be beautiful from a distance. Rows of green moving in the wind, but the wealth produced there depended upon violence. Long hours, punishment, family separation, and labor stolen from enslaved people. The land that would later become Fazendeville formed part of this plantation world. It was already carrying histories of ownership and dispossession long before anyone called it the village. And then, in 1814, war entered the landscape expansion. British soldiers landed below New Orleans. They marched through wet ground. Cannons and supplies had to be moved across unfamiliar landscape. These were experienced troops. Many had fought in the wars against Napoleon. They had discipline, training, competence. But defending New Orleans was an army unlike any the young United States had assembled. Regular American troops, Louisiana militia, Kentucky riflemen, Tennessee frontiersmen, free men of color, Choctaw fighters, Creole volunteers, sailors, artillerymen, and men associated with John Lafitte's Barataria operation. Different languages, different cultures, different legal positions in American society. Some were citizens. Some were denied full citizenship. Some lived free. Some remained enslaved. Yet they came together beneath Andrew Jackson's command to defend New Orleans. American forces established a defensive line near the Rodriguez Canal. Earthwork rose. Cannons were positioned. The battlefield stretched across former plantation land between the Mississippi River and the swamp. On January 8th, 1815, the British advanced. Then the fog lifted. Smoke rolled across the field. British soldiers moved forward in formation. American artillery tore through the advancing ranks. Officers fell. Units became disorganized. Major General Sir Edward Packham was mortally wounded. The central fighting lasted less than an hour, but British losses were catastrophic compared with those suffered by Jackson's main force. Battle of New Orleans became a national legend. Andrew Jackson became a hero. January 8th was celebrated for generations. The battle became a story about courage, unity, and national survival. The battlefields do not remain frozen at the moment the guns fall silent. Smoke clears, armies depart, grass returns, agriculture resumes, children are born, people build, the landscape continues living. Even when national memory wants it to remain a battlefield forever. The National Park Service today describes Chalmette as a historical landscape with numerous layers rather than only a military site. A broader interpretation is essential because Fazendeville would later be treated as an obstruction to the battlefield, even though its residents had made the battle part of their own identity. Decades after the fighting, a free man of color would become connected to a narrow parcel inside the landscape. His name, Jean-Pierre Fazende. Jean-Pierre Fazende's world cannot be understood without understanding New Orleans. 19th century New Orleans was an American city, but it was also French, Spanish, African, Caribbean, Catholic, Creole. Its streets carried multiple languages. Its markets carried goods from across the Atlantic world. Its music reflected European, African, Caribbean, and local traditions. And its racial order differed in important ways from the simple two-category system many Americans associate with the antebellum South. Louisiana has a significant population of free people of color, known in French as gens de couleur libres. They were not equal. Their freedoms were limited and increasingly threatened. They lived within a slave society. White political power could restrict their movement, assembly, education, work, and legal rights. Yet, free people of color created businesses, owned property, practiced skilled trades, joined religious and cultural institutions, formed families, educated children, and built communities. Some became musicians, teachers, tailors, builders, merchants, property owners, and among them was Jean-Pierre Fazende. Imagine him moving through New Orleans, merchants negotiating, vendors calling, carriages passing, river traffic arriving with coffee, fabric, sugar, tools, and food. A grocer had to understand supply, credit, customers, prices, relationships. A successful black businessman also had to understand a legal world in which ownership offered protection, but never complete security. Property mattered. A deed meant stability. Land could be worked, improved, sold, inherited, used to shelter a family, passed from one generation to the next. That was important for any person in 19th century Louisiana. For a free man of color living inside a slave society, it could mean much more. Later accounts describe Jean-Pierre as an opera lover. The detail invites us into another side of his life. Perhaps he sat inside of one of New Orleans theaters as gaslight illuminated balconies and velvet curtains. Perhaps he listened as singers filled the room. Perhaps for a few hours, music offered escape from racial restrictions waiting outside. We do not know what he thought. History has not preserved his private reflections. We should not manufacture words for him, but we can recognize the contradiction surrounding him. A city capable of producing beauty while profiting from bondage. A free black businessman moving through a society in which other black people could still be bought and sold. A man who possessed legal rights while knowing how easily those rights could be narrowed. And soon, a piece of land associated with the Fazende family would become a place where other black families pursued something slavery had systematically denied them: permanence. Then came the Civil War. Louisiana became a battlefield. New Orleans fell to Union forces in 1862. Slavery unraveled unevenly. The Emancipation Proclamation took effect in 1863, but freedom did not arrive everywhere at once. People escaped plantations, Union military policies changed, black men joined the armed forces. Families searched for relatives separated by sale, and when the war finally ended in 1865, nearly 4 million people emerged from legal slavery. Freedom had come, but freedom did not automatically bring land. It did not bring houses. It did not return stolen wages, did not provide schools, guarantee protection from white violence, guarantee voting rights would be respected, and it did not erase generations of deliberate deprivation. Imagine becoming legally free, but owning almost nothing: the clothing you wear, a few tools, perhaps a cooking pot, bedding, a mule if fortune has been kind. You need shelter, food, employment, school for your children, church, a place where your family cannot be removed because someone else controls the land. Across the South, formerly enslaved families struggled to gain property. Many entered sharecropping or tenant arrangements that reproduced dependency. A family could work another person's land all year, then discovered that fabricated debts had consumed the crop. Freedom existed in law, but economic power remained concentrated in familiar hands. Land ownership offered another possibility, a home that belonged to you, a garden you could plant for your own family, a fence you can build, a tree whose fruit your children might gather years later, a deed you can leave to a son or daughter. This is the historical world in which Fazendeville took shape. The Fazende land was a narrow, elongated tract associated with the former Chalmette plantation landscape. The National Park Service says Jean-Pierre Fazende inherited it in 1857. Campanella's geographical history says his son subdivided the tract into 33 lots in 1856 and sold them to free people of color, with emancipated people purchasing there after the Civil War. Oral history accounts place the community's formative development around the Reconstruction years. The exact sequence varies among sources, but the central truth is clear. A strip of plantation was divided, black families acquired lots, and by 1867 a community had emerged. 33 lots, one beside another, a single straight road running along the settlement. Campanella describes the road as paralleling an old mill race used for drainage, with the houses positioned on downriver or British side. The American battle line lay roughly 800 feet upriver, while Chalmette National Cemetery stood a similar distance downriver. Think about the transformation. Land once associated with plantation agriculture divided into black owned home sites, land where enslaved labor had produced wealth for others, becoming a place where black families might build something of their own. These lots were not palatial. The houses would be modest, the road remain unpaved. Life will require work, but ownership changed the meaning of that work. A board nailed into your own house was not improving another person's estate. A garden planted behind your home was feeding your family. A tree placed in the ground might shade your grandchildren. The first homes rose. Perhaps a family built one room first, then added another when money allowed. Neighbors lent tools, carpenters shared skills, people carried lumber, women prepared meals, children fetched nails or water. A roof went up, then another. Smoke rose from chimneys, gardens appeared, fences followed. Chickens scratched beneath porches, fruit and pecan trees grew. No single ceremony created Fazendeville. No governor cut a ribbon. No newspaper highlighted announced the beginning of a remarkable black community. It was created board by board, fence by fence, family by family. The village carried the Fazende name, Fazendeville. But residents would come to call it the village. Jean-Pierre Fazende did not single-handedly build every home. He did not construct every institution that followed. The residents themselves built Fazendeville. They created its culture, raised its children, established its church, maintained its relationships, protected one another. But the subdivision and transfer of land made that community possible. That distinction matters. Jean-Pierre Fazende's legacy was not a collection of grand buildings. It was opportunity. A formerly enslaved father could stand on a lot and imagine a house. A mother could plant food outside her own door. Children could grow up surrounded by adults who knew their name. Families could establish roots in a region that had once denied them ownership of their own bodies. The village location carried profound irony. It stood on one of the most famous battlefields in the United States, a place celebrated as sacred ground in the story of American independence. But for the families arriving after slavery, freedom was not a military monument. Freedom was a roof, a garden, a deed, a school, a church, a road where your children could run. A battlefield commemorates a moment. A village sustains generations. And Fazendeville was about to become more than 33 lots. In 1868, Battleground Baptist Church was organized. The date appears in community and historical accounts only 1 year after Fazendeville's recognized establishment. Listen to its name, Battleground Baptist Church. The residents understood where they lived. They did not erase the Battle of New Orleans. They incorporated it into their identity. The church connected their spiritual future with the history beneath their feet. Inside its walls, babies would be blessed, couples would be married, families would mourn, people would sing, preachers would speak of survival, of exodus, of deliverance, of a people led from bondage toward freedom. In a hostile society, a black church was never merely a place for Sunday worship. It was a gathering place, a source of leadership, a network of care, a place where news moved, where children learned how to stand before a congregation, where grieving families received food, where people without political power could organize community power. The first houses gave Fazendeville shelter. Battleground Baptist Church helped give it a soul. And around that church, the village would grow. A schoolhouse, a dance hall, a grocery, neighborhood bars, benevolent associations, a baseball field, pecan trees, crawfish ponds, gardens, music, generations. Jean-Pierre Fazende had been connected to the land, but the families of Fazendeville were about to transform that land into a world. We entered the village. We would sit on its porches, walk through its gardens, listen outside the schoolhouse while the piano plays, meet the children who hunted battlefield relics and called the Chalmette Monument the castle, and discover how a small black community survived Reconstruction, Jim Crow, segregation, depression, and war, only to be threatened by the government's desire to preserve the history beneath their homes. For nearly a century, Fazendeville had proven that black freedom could take root. Then one day, America came down the road. Imagine, if you will, prior to their arrival, an ordinary summer morning in Fazendeville. Birds sing from the pecan trees. A screen door closes. Someone works a hoe through garden soil. Children laugh near the road. A baseball strikes a wooden bat in the distance. Then, that sound of an automobile approaching over an unpaved road. The people of Fazendeville had survived almost everything America had placed before them. Slavery had ended, but racism remained. Reconstruction came and was betrayed. Jim Crow hardened around them. Their children attended segregated schools. Their elders risked their livelihoods to register black citizens to vote. Yet through all of it, the village endured. Its families built homes, planted gardens, established business, worshiped inside Battleground Baptist Church, raised children beneath pecan trees, played baseball in a pasture, and danced inside a one-room schoolhouse after the desk had been pushed aside. For nearly a century, Fazendeville had proven that black freedom could take root. Then that one day, America came down the road. Not with soldiers, not with guns, not with cannon fire. This time America arrived wearing suits, carrying maps, property appraisals, government papers, and a vision for the land that did not include the people already living upon it. Door opens, footsteps approach a house, a hand lifts a document, and after nearly 100 years of life, the people of Fazendeville are told they must leave. This is the story of what happened when the United States decided that the memory of a battle fought in 1815 was more important than the living African American community that had grown upon the battlefield afterward. It is the story of negotiation, resistance, eminent domain, forced relocation, demolition, exile, and the generations who refused to allow Fazendeville to be forgotten. The fighting at Chalmette ended on January 8, 1815, but America never stopped returning to it. The victory transformed Andrew Jackson into a national hero. For generations, January 8 was commemorated with speeches, military ceremonies, parades, and patriotic gatherings. But the fate of Fazendeville, a bulldozer engine turns over, the children disappear, the church disappears, the baseball game disappears, silence. There is a moment in the life of every condemned place when the people living there understand that the decision has already been made. The meetings may continue, the lawyers may continue arguing, letters may still be written, government officials may still speak of procedures, appropriations, appraisals, and deadlines. But somewhere beneath all those official words, the people know. They know the road will close. They know the neighbors will leave. They know the houses will come down. They know the place they call home has already begun to disappear. By 1964, Fazendeville was approaching that moment. The community that had stood for nearly a century between the Chalmette Monument and the National Cemetery was being emptied. Not because it had been abandoned, not because its people had forgotten it, not because the houses had all collapsed. Fazendeville was being removed because the federal government had decided that the battlefield should appear more like the landscape of 1815. And in that historical vision, there was no room for the village, no room for the houses, no room for Battleground Baptist Church, no room for the grocery, bar rooms, school, baseball field, pecan trees, no room for the families whose lives had become part of the land. The battlefield would be preserved. The village would be sacrificed. Imagine Fazendeville during one of its final evenings. The sun descends over the Mississippi River. Light falls across the narrow road. The fewer windows are glowing now. A house that once held a family is dark. The curtains have been removed. The furniture is gone. The yard is empty. Farther down the road, another house stands silent. Then another. Each darkened building marks another family displaced, another goodbye, another section of the village losing its voice. Someone is removing boards. Someone is loading furniture. Someone is carrying boxes from the front porch. Some taking down photographs that have hung on the same wall for decades. Some trying to decide what can be saved. And someone is standing in the center of an empty room, unable to move. Imagine one final night. A family remains inside a house that has belonged to them for years, perhaps generations. Most of the belongings have already been packed. The room sounds different without furniture. Every footstep echoes. The children have been told they are moving. They know the name of the new neighborhood. They may even have shown the new house. But children do not understand eminent domain. They understand only that their bedroom is disappearing. They understand that their cousins will no longer live down the road. They understand that the place where they played will no longer belong to them. A mother folds the final pieces of clothing. Father stands outside. Maybe he looks toward the monument. Maybe he looks down the village road. Maybe he remembers walking that road as a child. He remembers when every house was occupied. He remembers the porch conversations, the baseball games, church mornings, funerals, weddings, people calling to one another from across their yards. Now he sees darkness. The father steps back inside. There is nothing left to say. No speech can stop the government. No memory can hold the walls upright. Tomorrow they will leave. A truck idles. Cardboard boxes slide across the wooden porch. Morning comes. It always does. Even on the day a world ends, the family rises early. No one has slept. The children are quiet. The adults move with forced purpose. Carry this, wrap that. Don't forget the dishes. Where are the photographs? Who has the family Bible? Did someone empty the kitchen cabinet? Check the bedroom again. Check beneath the bed. Check the shed. Check everything. As though enough checking might prevent them from leaving part of themselves behind. But something is always left behind. A nail on a wall, a mark on the doorway, a flower planted beside the porch, a child's marble lost beneath the house, a name scratched into wood, a memory attached to a room, a sound, a smell, a shadow. A person cannot pack a whole life into boxes. The final box is loaded. The family stands outside. The front door remains open. For a moment, the house looks as though it is waiting for them to return. Someone walks back. They enter the house one last time. Kitchen, front room, bedroom, hallway. Every room contains another version of the family. A younger mother, a living grandparent, a child taking a first step, a Christmas morning, a funeral gathering, a stormy night, a Sunday afternoon. The person reaches for the front door. They turn. They look into the house. They step outside and close it. A key turns, but the key no longer means ownership. It no longer means security. It no longer means we can come home. Some Fazendeville families attempted to save more than their possessions. They moved their houses. Entire buildings were lifted from the ground. Beams were placed beneath them. The houses were raised. Wheels were positioned below. Then the homes began moving away from Fazendeville. Imagine watching that. A house traveling down the road. A bedroom passing the battlefield. A kitchen rolling beneath electrical wires. A front porch moving toward a new neighborhood. It must have looked impossible, as though the house itself was trying to escape. Valerie Lindsay Snyder remembered that her father was among the last residents to leave. Her family's house was moved by trailer to Raina Street in the lower Ninth Ward. The building survived the government taking, but it could not carry the land with it. The house arrived in New Orleans, but Fazendeville remained behind. The walls survived, the rooms survived. Perhaps the family could sit inside and recognize the familiar architecture. The window, the doorway, the place where a table once stood, but when they stepped outside, the village was gone. No familiar road, no battlefield at the edge of the community, no relatives living in the same arrangement, no old trees, no neighboring houses standing where memory expected them to be. A house can be moved. A community cannot. Then the machines came. The destruction of Fazendeville is often summarized in one sentence. The village was razed. The houses were demolished. The community was removed. But sentences can protect us from reality. They can make destruction sound clean, administrative, almost painless. So we're not going to look away. We're going to remain on the road. We're going to watch what the words actually mean. A bulldozer does not understand memory. It does not know who was born inside that house. It does not know who died there. It does not know who sat on the porch. It does not know that a father built that back room with his own hands. It does not know that a child's height is marked inside the doorway. The machine understands only resistance. Wood, Nails, glass, brick. The blade lowers. The bulldozer moves toward the first house. For one final moment, the building is still a home. The porch still faces the road. The window still holds reflections. The roof still covers the rooms. The blade makes contact. The porch post shifts, boards separate. The front wall behind bends inward. Glass breaks. The roof trembles. And the house collapses into itself. Dust rises. The air fills with pieces of wood. Wallpaper that once surrounded a family is exposed to the sky. The bedroom becomes debris. The kitchen becomes debris. The child room becomes debris. A life becomes debris. The bulldozer reverses, it turns, and moves toward the next house. One house, then another, then another. The blade reaches a porch where people once gathered after church. The porch falls. The machine reaches a house where a woman raised her children. The walls collapse. It reaches a home where relatives gathered around a sick family member. The roof caves in. It reaches a building where someone once played music through an open window. The window shatters. It reaches the yard where children chased one another. The ground is flattened. A baseball field becomes open land. A church community becomes scattered memory. A school disappears from the physical landscape. The government had not ordered the destruction of memories, only structures. But people do not live inside of structures alone. They live through them. Every demolished house breaks a connection between people and place. Every flattened yard erases evidence. Every removed foundation makes it easier for future visitors to believe that nothing was ever there. Perhaps former residents watch from a distance. Perhaps some refused to return. Perhaps others needed to see. Imagine standing beyond the blade. You know the house is empty. You know no one is physically inside. But when the walls fall, you feel something inside yourself collapse with it. Because you're not watching lumber break. You're watching proof disappear. Proof that your family lived there. Proof that your community existed. Proof that this land once held something other than a battlefield. Another house disappears. Another. Soon, the road no longer looks like a village. It looks like the aftermath of a storm. But this was not nature. There had been no hurricane warning, no flood, no fire racing from house to house. The destruction was authorized, budgeted, planned, approved, and completed in the name of history. Eventually, only one house remains, the last house of Fazendeville. Perhaps its former family has already left. Perhaps the windows are empty. Perhaps the door hangs open. The buildings stand alone, surrounded by the remains of the village. No neighboring porch, no conversation across the road, no children, no church bell, no evening cooking, only a house waiting for the blade. The machine approaches slowly for the final time. The house seems small against it, fragile, and the blade lowers. And somewhere inside the memory of that building, the village is still alive. A woman is laughing, a child is running through the hall, someone is preparing Sunday dinner, a man repairing a chair, a radio playing, rain is striking the roof. Someone says, "I'm home." The house collapses. After the house is cleaned, the evidence, broken boards removed, foundations disturbed, debris carried away, the land leveled, the road itself began to disappear. The Fazendeville Road had once connected the St. Bernard Highway to the Mississippi River. It had carried workers home, children to school, families to church, visitors to neighbors, funeral processions, wedding celebrations, everyday life. Now the road was no longer needed, not for the battlefield that preservationists imagined. The village had been removed so the land could resemble an earlier century. The road that had carried black life through nearly 100 years of Louisiana history became an unwanted line across the national story. So the line was erased. Grass would eventually grow over it. Rain would soften its edges. Visitors would walk nearby without realizing that a road had ever been there. And now, that is how a village becomes invisible. Not all at once. First the people leave, then the houses disappear, the road fades, the generation that remembers begins to age, then tourists arrive, look across open grass, and assume the field has always been empty. On January 8, 1965, 150 years after the Battle of New Orleans, the sesquicentennial, the battle is prepared, officials gather, flags move in the wind, speeches recall Andrew Jackson, the British advance, the American line, the victory. The nation remembers 1815. But what does the landscape remember? Beneath the ceremonies, the land still carries the shape of Fazendeville. The soil remembers fence posts. The ground remembers foundations. Roots remain where gardens once grew. Fragments remain beneath the surface. Nails, glass, brick, objects too small to interest a bulldozer. The nation looks backward 150 years while refusing to look at what happened only months earlier. The battlefield appeared unified, open, historic. The view had been cleared. The village had been removed. America celebrates the preservation of one past on top of the destruction of another. This is the terrible contradiction at the center of Fazendeville. History was destroyed to preserve history. The people of Fazendeville did not disappear, they moved. Some relocated elsewhere in St. Bernard Parish, some settled in Violet. Many moved to the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans. They carried furniture, photographs, family Bibles, church traditions, recipes, songs, stories. They carried one another, but they could not recreate the exact arrangement of the village. In Fazendeville, relatives have lived only doors apart. Children could move between houses. Neighbors watched one another. The elderly remained surrounded by people who knew them. A mother needing help did not always need to make a telephone call. She could step onto the porch. A family facing hardship could depend on a network formed over generations. After displacement, distance entered those relationships. A cousin who had lived down the road might now live across the city. An aunt might live in another parish. A church member might require a car ride. The village survived emotionally, but geographically, it had been broken apart. Government appraisals measured houses. They did not measure relationships. They measured acreage. They did not measure the value of a grandmother living nearby. They measured construction. They did not measure belonging. The families received compensation for property, but there was no compensation for the loss of community. No payment for the road, no payment for the neighbors, no payment for the church's place in the landscape, no payment for a child to be explained to why home no longer existed. Powerful hurricane is approaching Louisiana coast. Then in September 1965, only months after the destruction of Fazendeville, Hurricane Betsy came. The storm struck Louisiana. The Ninth Ward flooded. Some Fazendeville families who had been displaced by the government were displaced again by water. Imagine the cruelty of the timing. Families had only recently moved. They were trying to begin again. New street, new neighbors, new patterns, new routines. Perhaps some boxes had not yet been unpacked. Perhaps photos of Fazendeville remained stacked inside closets. Perhaps furniture had only recently been arranged. Then the wind rose, the water came. A house moved from Fazendeville to Raina Street survived the government taking, only to flood during Betsy. A home rescued from the bulldozer was invaded by water. The family had already experienced one form of removal. Now they faced another. The first had arrived through official notices. the second through rain, wind, and fail protection. One carried the seal of the government, the other carried the force of nature. But to the family standing in water, the result could feel painfully familiar. Leave, start again, rebuild, carry what you can, lose what you cannot. The destruction of Fazendeville did not end when the bulldozers stopped. The consequences followed the people. They followed the houses. They followed the families into their neighborhoods where displacement had sent them. Years passed, then decades. Tourists visited the Chalmette Battlefield. School children heard the story of the Battle of New Orleans. Rangers pointed toward the American line. Guides spoke of Jackson, Pakenham, artillery, and victory, but for many visitors, Fazendeville remained unknown. The village's disappearance had become so complete that the absence seemed natural. Open field, grass, monument, cemetery. Nothing visibly told the visitor families once lived here. Children once played here. A church once served this community. A road ran toward the river. The lack of ruins created the illusion of an undisturbed historical landscape, and that illusion was itself the result of destruction. Former residents knew differently. They could return to the battlefield and see houses that were no longer there. They could point across that grass. The Kagers lived there. The church was that way. That was the road. We played ball there. Our house stood near that place. To everyone else, grass. To them, home. Memory became the only surviving map. Then a scholar sat with the former residents. Her name was Dr. Joyce Marie Jackson, a cultural anthropologist, an ethnomusicologist, a listener. The National Park Service commissioned Jackson to research the community and record the memories of the people who had lived there. The machine that mattered now was not a bulldozer, it was a tape recorder. A former resident sits before a microphone. Perhaps they have told these stories with the family before, but now the memory is being formally preserved. Name, family, house, church, school, neighbors, games, work, food, music, the day they left. The house moving down the road, the bulldozers, the scattered families. Each voice begins rebuilding the village, not in wood, in testimony. The official records could explain how the land was acquired. The oral histories explain what the land meant. Government documents could list parcels. Former residents could place people inside them. A map could show property lines. Memory could describe who sat on the porch. A report could say the community was removed. A voice could say, that was my home. One story, then another, then another. House by house, the government had destroyed Fazendeville. Voice by voice, the residents began building it again. Eldred Kager, Miriam Kager-Jones, Peter Pierre, Valerie Lindsay Snyder, Donna Gant Williams, Regina Pierre Woodbridge, William Gant, Eugene Kager, Jean-Pierre Fazende. These names are not background details, they are the story. Because phrases like the residents become another form of erasure. The residents were people with names, families, histories, personalities, dreams, disagreements, faith, humor, pain. Say their names. Say them slowly, because every name puts a person back onto the road. Every name opens another front door. Every name lights another window, and every name says someone lived here. 2005, another storm entered the history of Fazendeville, Hurricane Katrina. The levee failures devastated the lower Ninth Ward. St. Bernard Parish was overwhelmed. Homes were flooded. Buildings were torn from foundations. Families were displaced across Louisiana and across the United States. And many former Fazendeville residents and descendants faced another loss of place. Dr. Joyce Marie Jackson described the experience through a powerful idea, the declaration of taking, twice. The first taking occurred when the federal government acquired Fazendeville and the homes were razed. The second came through Katrina, Rita, and the catastrophic flooding that again uprooted families who had already survived displacement. Schneider's family house had been moved from Fazendeville to Raina Street. It had survived the bulldozers. It had flooded during Bessie, then Katrina came. The house was swept down the block. Think about that journey. A house born in Fazendeville, lifted from its earth, carried to the lower Ninth Ward, flooded in one hurricane, then physically moved again by another. How many times can a family lose the same home? Katrina also threatened something less visible: family archives, photographs, documents, funeral programs, church records, letters, Bibles, images of Fazendeville. Materials kept safe by families because official institutions had not always preserved their stories. Water entered the homes, boxes dissolved, photographs floated, ink bled, faces disappeared. The original village had been physically erased. Now the private evidence carried by its displaced people was being erased too. The first taking removed the community from the land, the second threatened the memories that survived. But the people survived again. They gathered, they spoke, they remembered. A house can be swept away. A photograph can be destroyed. A document can disappear, but a story carried inside a person can still be passed forward. Former residents told their children. Children told their grandchildren. Families returned to the battlefield. Church members preserved traditions. Researchers recorded testimony. Artists made the invisible visible. Filmmakers searched for images. Historians returned to old documents. And slowly, Fazendeville began reappearing in public memory. Not as an obstacle in the center of a battlefield, not as a collection of structures removed by eminent domain, but as a community. A black community, founded during Reconstruction. A place of freedom, family, independence, and belonging. The National Park Service began openly examining the history of Fazendeville. The institution responsible for interpreting the battlefield also had to confront the fact that the expansion of the battlefield had destroyed a living community. That confrontation matters. It does not reverse what happened. It does not rebuild the houses. It does not return the land. It does not restore the wealth families may have lost. But acknowledgement changes the public landscape. For decades, a visitor could look across the field and see only 1815. Now another story begins, interrupting that view. The story of 1867. The story of Reconstruction. The story of black ownership. The story of the 20th century village. The story of eminent domain. The story of 1964. The battlefield is no longer permitted to exist as a single moment frozen in time. The land must hold its contradictions: American victory, black independence, federal preservation, forced displacement, national memory, community erasure. All of it happened here. Researchers gathered old photographs, maps, property information, oral history, visual clues. Using modern technology, they began constructing representations of the lost village. A road appeared on a screen, then a house, another house, the church, the space of the buildings. The landscape begins filling again. A three-dimensional model can never create the life or recreate the life of Fazendeville. It cannot reproduce the smell of Sunday dinner. It cannot recreate the exact sound of the congregation. It cannot give a child back the afternoon when they played beneath the pecan tree, but it can confront the emptiness. It can show visitors that the field was not always open. It can restore scale, proximity, density, community. It can make a viewer understand this was not one isolated house. This was a village. The bulldozers flattened Fazendeville into an open field. Digital reconstruction raises it again. one wall at a time. Then something living appeared on the battlefield. Louisiana irises, African lilies, flowers blooming in places connected to the former village. They stood quietly in the field, no roof above them, no fence around them, no family tending the yard, yet they returned, again and again, spring after spring. Researchers considered whether these plants might mark the locations of former home gardens. Imagine that possibility. A woman plants flowers beside her Fazendeville house. Years pass. The government acquires the property. The family leaves. The bulldozer demolishes the house. The road disappears. Grass covers the village, but underground roots remain. Decades later, the flowers rise. The houses are gone. The people have scattered, but the garden remembers. Perhaps nothing could better represent Fazendeville, a life buried beneath an official landscape, returning unexpectedly in bloom. On April 19, 2021, former residents, descendants, community members, and officials gathered for the dedication of the historical marker honoring Fazendeville. More than a half a century after the village was destroyed, its name returned to the landscape, Fazendeville. Printed where visitors could see it, printed where children could read it, printed near the battlefield that had expanded across the community's remains. Imagine the descendants standing there, some carrying memories of the village itself, others knowing Fazendeville only through the stories of their parents and grandparents. A marker is unveiled. For the first time in decades, the public landscape officially speaks the village's name. The marker cannot rebuild the houses. It cannot reunite every scattered family. It cannot undo the taking, but it does something the bulldozers were never meant to allow. It makes the erasure visible. A visitor can no longer look across the battlefield and assume the grass tells the whole story. The marker asks questions. What was Fazendeville? Who lived there? Why was it destroyed? Who made the decision? Where did the people go? What does America preserve? And what does America sacrifice? In 2022, the documentary Battlegrounds, The Lost Community of Fazendeville, brought the story to a wider public. Historic photographs appeared on screen, former residents and descendants spoke. The village took shape through voices, faces, and image. The documentary's title carries more than one meaning: Battlegrounds. The ground where Jackson's forces defeated the British, the ground where preservationists fought to expand a national park, the ground from which a black community was removed, the ground where descendants continue fighting to have their history remembered. Fazendeville was located on a battlefield, but Fazendeville itself became a battlefield over memory. Today, visitors still come to Chalmette Battlefield. They walk toward the monument. They stand near the reconstructed American rampart. They imagine British troops advancing across smoke-filled fields. They visit the National Cemetery. They read signs. They take photographs. But now, another history waits beneath their feet. A visitor may only notice the slight depression in the ground where Fazendeville Road once ran. A subtle line, almost nothing. But once you know the story, the landscape changes. Grass becomes a neighborhood. Open space becomes a row of homes. Silence becomes children playing. A breeze moving through the field becomes wind moving across porches. The battlefield no longer belongs only to January 8, 1815. It belongs to every person who lived on this land afterward. Come with me. We're walking the road, not the road the government left behind, the road memory preserved. Stand near the highway, face the Mississippi River, now begin walking. The modern grass moves beneath your feet, but beneath it, imagine packed earth, the Fazendeville Road. Look to your left, a house. A woman sits on the porch. She watches children running in the yard. Look to your right, another house. Laundry moves on a line. Someone is cooking. Keep walking. A neighbor calls across the road. A screen door slams. Someone laughs from inside a kitchen. Farther ahead, Battleground Baptist Church. On Sunday morning, people arrive dressed carefully, voices filling the building. A hymn begins. Continue toward the river. Children are playing baseball. A bat strikes a ball. Someone runs, someone shouts. A child chases the ball toward the pecan trees. An older person calls for them to be careful. Keep walking. Now the sounds begin to change. The choir fades. The baseball game disappears. The porch empties. The laundry vanishes. The house is darkened. The machine is coming from behind us. Do not turn around yet. Look at the village one final time. The homes, the road, the church, the people, the life. Now turn. The blade reaches the first house. One by one, the village disappears behind us. Keep walking. Don't run. Carry the names. Carry the voices. Carry the story toward the river. Because history tried to make Fazendeville end here, but memory kept walking. What was destroyed when Fazendeville fell? 30 or more houses? A church? A school? A grocery? A road? Yes. But the true loss cannot be listed so easily. A black landholding community was destroyed. A community created in uncertain freedom following the Civil War. A place where formerly enslaved people and free people of color could build homes, own property, raise family, create institutions, establish independence. That history matters. For generations in America, black people had been denied ownerships of their own bodies, labor, and futures. After emancipation, land carried extraordinary meaning. Land could mean stability, autonomy, inheritance, protection. A home could pass from parent to child. Property could create generational wealth. Community networks could support survival. Fazendeville represented more than houses. It represented the possibilities of freedom. Then the federal government decided that the land's military history should take visual priority over the community that had grown there afterward. The law called the process eminent domain. The residents experienced it as the destruction of the home. The Battle of New Orleans deserves to be remembered. The battlefield deserves protection. But history becomes dangerous when preservation is treated as innocent. Preservation always involves choices. Restore the land in 1815, Fazendeville disappears. Restore it to 1900, and Fazendeville returns. Restore it to the period before European colonization, and nearly every later structure disappears. There is no single natural version of the landscape. There are only layers. Native land, colonial land, plantation land, battlefield, cemetery, reconstruction community, national park. Every generation leaves something behind. The question is not whether history should be preserved. The question is, who is granted the power to choose which history remains visible? In Fazendeville, the federal government chose 1815. The families living there paid the price. To the mothers who packed their kitchens, your homes mattered. To the fathers who watched their houses they had worked for disappeared, your labor mattered. To the elders who stood on the road and remembered earlier generations, your memories mattered. To the children who did not understand why their village had to vanish, your childhoods matter. To the people who moved to the lower Ninth Ward, your displacement mattered. To the families flooded during Betsy, your losses mattered. To those struck again by Katrina, your suffering mattered. To the former residents who sat before a tape recorder and described the village, your voices saved it. To the descendants who returned to the battlefield, your presence reclaimed it. To every person who pointed into the grass and said, "Our house stood there," you were telling the truth before the marker ever did. Fazendeville did not return in the way its people deserved. The houses were not rebuilt. The original road was not reopened. The families did not receive their village back. But Fazendeville returned through memory. It returned through oral histories, photographs, scholarship, church traditions, digital models, documentary film, art, flowers, historical marker, through the descendants speaking the name, and now through you. Because you know. You know that field was not always empty. You know the community was alive when it was condemned. You know that preservation came with human cost. You know that the people resisted. You know that they carried Fazendeville beyond the road. Knowing does not repair the injustice, but knowing prevents the bulldozers from having the final word. The sun is setting over Chalmette. The monument casts a long shadow. Visitors are leaving. Car doors close. Engine starts. The battlefield grows quiet. Soon, only the river remains. The wind, the grass, the dead in the cemetery, and the memories beneath the land. Walk toward the place where Fazendeville Road once began. Stand still. Listen. At first you hear nothing. Then, a screen door. A woman calling from the porch. Children laughing. A baseball being hit with a bat. The congregation singing. A man returning from work. Footsteps on the road. A radio playing through an open window. Dishes being put on the table. Someone saying grace. Someone calling a neighbor's name. Someone saying, "Come inside, supper's ready." The village appears around you, not as ruins, whole. Every house standing, every window glowing, families moving through the evening. Pierre Fazende walks slowly down that road. He sees what grew from that land. The village created after slavery. The homes, church, the generations. He stops. He looks toward that battlefield. In the distance, the bulldozer begins. But this time, the people do not disappear. The machine moves closer. The blade touches the first house, but the house remains. It has become memory. Bulldozer moves to church. The voices continue singing. Passes through the baseball field. The children continue playing. It covers the road, and the people continue walking. Because physical destruction can remove buildings, it cannot completely remove a place. Once its story has been carried forward, the village remains transparent, luminous, standing between the monument and the river. The old road glows beneath the grass. Every home illuminated, every family returned, and every name remembered. They wanted an empty battlefield, but the field was never empty. They wanted visitors to see 1815, but beneath 1815 stood 1867. Beneath the monument stood a village. Beneath the victory stood another struggle. Beneath the grass stood homes. And beneath the silence, Fazendeville was still speaking. Can you hear it? Fazendeville, a community founded in freedom, a village built by black families, a home destroyed for historical views, a people scattered but never erased. America is very good at building monuments, stone risers, names are carved, flags are raised, anniversaries are celebrated, but the truest test of a nation is not only which victories it remembers, it is whether it has the courage to remember the people's sacrifice beneath those victories. Fazendeville asks us to look at preservation differently. It asks us to recognize that a battlefield is not frozen on the day of battle. People continue living. Children are born, communities form, churches rise, families build future. The history that comes afterward is not an intrusion. It is history too. The people of Fazendeville did not prevent America from remembering the Battle of New Orleans. They became another chapter in the history of the land. But instead of allowing those histories to stand together, the country chose to remove one. Their choice can never be undone, but it can be renamed, studied, taught, remembered, and become a warning. Whenever someone said, "This community stands in the way of progress," ask what progress means. Someone says, "This land must be restored," ask, "Restored to whose time?" Whenever someone says, "The residents will be compensated," ask whether money can replace belonging. Whenever a landscape appears empty, ask who was removed to create the emptiness. And whenever history appears simple, look beneath the grass. Lights appear in the houses one by one. The Kager home, lit. The Pierre home, lit. The Gant home, lit. The Lindsay home, lit. Every house, every porch, every life, the road shines from the highway to the river, a village of memory. The monument stands nearby, but tonight it is not the only memorial on the land. The people themselves are the memorial. The stories are the memorial. The flowers are the memorial. The voices are the memorial. And this telling is part of the memorial. Thank you for joining me on this long journey through Fazendeville, a history almost erased. My name is Tanya, the tour guide, and I'm giving you the hidden, haunted, and forgotten histories of New Orleans. Tonight, we entered a village built from the promise of freedom. We stood beside its families. We watched powerful institutions decide that their homes interrupted a national story. We heard the legal notices, watched the road close. We followed the houses as they moved toward new neighborhoods. We remained as the bulldozers arrived. We watched the village fall, house by house. We followed its people into the Ninth Ward, through Hurricane Betsy, through the long years of silence, through Hurricane Katrina, through the second taking. We listened as a former resident rebuilt Fazendeville with their voices. We watched the village rise through scholarship, film, flowers, art, and public remembrance. And now we stand in the present day. The houses are gone. The original road is almost invisible. The people have scattered across generations. But Fazendeville remains. It remains whenever a descendant speaks the name. It remains whenever a visitor reads the marker. It remains whenever someone looks across the grass and imagines the village. It remains whenever America is forced to confront the cost of choosing one history over another. It remains here, between the monument, the cemetery, and the Mississippi River. So when you visit Chalmette Battlefield, do not see only soldiers, see families. Do not hear only canyons, hear children. Do not only look toward the monument, look toward the invisible road. And when the wind moves through the fields, listen carefully, because the village is not silent. It is waiting for someone to remember. We were here. They were here. They lived here. They built here. They loved here. They resisted here. They were moved from here, and they must be remembered here. Fazendeville was demolished, but it was not defeated. Fazendeville was scattered, but it was not lost. Fazendeville was erased from the landscape, but it survived in the people. Good night to the village. Good night to the families. Good night to the old road beneath the grass. And good night to Fazendeville, the village that America tried to remove from history, and the village that memory brought home. One bell, then silence. This is Tanya, the tour guide. Have a great day. Thanks for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to walk the city streets with me, you can find a link to book a tour when you visit the city of New Orleans. Bye-bye for now.